Voice of San Diego podcasts are sponsored in part by the San Diego Tourism Authority. As a nonprofit news organization, we depend on our members, foundations, and sponsors like the San Diego Tourism Authority to provide funding to support the investigative journalism you expect from us. We are very grateful for all of our supporters, and we will recognize them during the show. From the 1 in 8 local jobs provided by the tourism industry to the $289 million in hotel room tax revenue generated for the city's general fund, San Diegans have many reasons to be proud to live in a destination powered by tourism. As a nonprofit organization with a mission of promoting travel to San Diego, the San Diego Tourism Authority celebrates what tourism means to our community. Find out why at sandiego.org/impact. And if you like the Voice of San Diego's work and want to become a sponsor too, contact us at development@voiceofsandiego.org.
Welcome to the Voice of San Diego podcast, where we make sense of local politics, schools, housing, public safety, the civic issues that impact the life of a San Diego resident. We break it down so you can understand it and make educated decisions.
Everything that goes into our investigative reporting, the journalists, public records requests, the data crunching, and this very show depends on the support of people like you because we're a nonprofit news organization. Enjoy the show.
All right, welcome to those of you listening on News Radio 600 Kogo. My name is Scott Lewis, and I'm here with my friend Andrew Keatts.
What's up, buddy?
How are you?
Good.
And Sara Libby.
Hey.
How are you?
Good.
Okay, so we were earlier debating what to do about hero and goat. It's not something it's not easy for us to come up with the hero of the week.
Often.
It's the hardest thing we do every single week.
The hardest thing, like the most intense investigations and difficult legal decisions and
not as hard as
management.
Finding one person that we want to give credit to.
And then goat usually comes naturally, but we had a big battle about goat this week because you wanted to name May Gray, a climate phenomenon, the goat.
Yeah, it's garbage and I don't like it and it sucks.
Except that it's not. It's fantastic. And it's a relief. Sara, you didn't weigh in.
Yeah, I'm neutral. So as an Pacific Northwest ambassador,
yes,
it's like Pacific Northwest light, where it's like all the coolness with none of the actual rain. So It's kind of nice.
See, my take is that it's May great.
Oh.
And
that's why he wanted to do this segment. He's been waiting for that.
Just can't express how upset I am.
Because
I loved
because
it.
It's look, the worst climate of any kind is searing heat. The heat that you can't. You're.
That's actually the second best.
Okay,
no, it's
climate.
Bad.
It's very good.
Searing,
it's that hot.
Searing heat. Because remember that one year, like 3 years ago or 4 years ago, we didn't have May Gray, and it turned out to be like 100 degrees, 98 degrees, and then there was like 8 fires, and the whole place was on fire. You would rather have that?
Yes.
The flames, literally, it started the county on fire.
Correct.
I don't understand why some people are treating May Gray like a brand new phenomenon.
Literally,
there's like all these news reports that are like, June gloom came early this year.
Yeah.
It has its own name.
It sucks, though. That's the thing about it.
Okay, so
it's good when there are not clouds and there is not precipitation and when there is sun and when the temperature is above, say, 72. That is when it's
anything
good.
Above 72 is good. Like
Yes,
even 104.
There's no upper limit. No, 104 is great.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
the only thing that's bad is any cloud and any rain of any kind or snow and being below, say, 66.
all right. So
That's all bad.
That's a bad take, and I resent you for making me side so strongly with Scott.
Thank you, Sara. I love it when that finally happens. So let's
People who pretend to like rain are dumb and bad.
If you have access to the internet, tweet at Andy at Andy_KEATTS. There's two
Be a bunch
T's.
of virtue signalers pretending to like clouds and rain.
Tell him how great May Gray is. May Gray needs some allies now. It's under attack.
You're posers.
It's not a new phenomenon, but it's being newly weaponized. Newly weaponized.
Bad, dumb people with stupid opinions.
We got a good show this week. We have actually two people we've talked to. Susan Muncie from GenerateHope to talk to continue the banter and conversation about our the sort of sex work debate that we've been hosting. And you, Andy, spent some time speaking with Larry Krasner, the newly elected DA in the city of Philadelphia, who came to town to support Genevieve Jones-Wright, who is kind of modeled or presented as somebody following in his tracks as sort of these sort of reformist.
Yeah, I'd say he's the highest profile national example of this movement.
Okay. Yeah, so I look forward to that discussion. But first, there's two things that happened to me that I know you don't like this week. Mm-hmm. One is that I went to the taxpayers' dinner, and a lot of people there said that they really like my thread of all the mailers that I get and that people send me.
Why do you think I don't like that?
Because you hate anything that people say that's nice about something I'm doing. Right? That's correct.
No, it's fine. I like when you do good things and people recognize it.
And then the second thing that happened is that I did a Ask Me Anything you can still find on the San Diego Reddit subreddit, and we got a donation out of it. And
so that I hate. and specifically, you're bringing it up here. That is bothersome.
But on the mailers, we wanted to pull out. There's just. I don't know why I'm obsessed with mailers, but I am, and there's been some amazing ones, and now people are sending me from all over the region their favorite examples. There's so much that happens in these mailers. It's like it's the front of politics. It's the most synthesized, sort of succinct effort to make people angry and afraid in the fewest words possible. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we wanted to gather some of our favorites. I have two, if you don't mind.
Okay.
One is just
hold them up to the camera there so that all our viewers can.
Doesn't matter what it looks like. One of them is just a very benign Rocky Chavez, in support of Rocky Chavez mailer.
Okay.
And what I like about it is what I like about a lot of these is the name of the committee supporting it, paying for it.
Those are good.
This one was paid for by Spirit of Democracy America. Just all the words. I don't know why they couldn't fit liberty in. I don't know what was wrong with them.
Troops.
Yeah, they couldn't fit liberty or colors.
The flag.
Yeah, come on.
Yeah.
The next one is this sort of common thing that comes up with mailers, which is rank hypocrisy.
Yeah, sure.
Paul Kerr, who is not a poor man, sent out mailers attacking Sara Jacobs. So these are two Democrats running for the 49th district seat, Congress.
So I'll preempt you here. I do not think that this mailer is hypocritical.
Yeah. Okay. Hypocrisy is. It's just. So they say they knock her for owning condos in New York and Washington.
Yeah.
Like her wealth is the problem when he's
but
wealthy,
it's pretty
too.
Specifically that she's an heir is the attack, and he is a self-made millionaire.
Oh, okay.
That is the attack, and you can care or not care that she's an heir, that he's a self-made millionaire, but that's a distinction that's real.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. But it goes back to another related one, which is not related, but there's the Democrats are actually attacking Filner. We have a little bit of a disagreement about this, too. Mm-hmm. They're attacking the San Diego County Democratic Party is attacking Lori Saldana for supporting Bob Filner after raising concerns about him to the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
So they're attacking her for her telling them about a problem with this guy and them not doing anything about it, but her also not doing anything about it. So they're hitting her.
Oh, it's actually from the Democratic Party?
Yeah.
It's not from the PAC, whatever the PAC opposed to Lori Saldana and hypocrites or something.
No. In fact, it's one of these.
That's another great.
That is a good one. Although it trips me up every time. It's like, it's like we're opposed to hypocrisy and also Lori Saldana for supervisor, which is like I don't know. In any case, go ahead.
Well, this is something you noticed too, is that this is one of those types that's to all Democrats, it's funded by the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
And then to non-Democrats, it's funded by Nathan Fletcher himself.
Yeah. That's a tricky one. I would be interested in hearing how they successfully straddled the campaign finance laws on that one.
Well, basically, if they send it to a Democratic household, they can pay for it.
But how do you do like the shared costs? How do you split that up?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, they can share. They can give each other money.
Right.
And what's it
seems logistically very hard.
That's all I mean. Yeah, I'm sure they've straightened it out in some way that crosses the T's legally, but it's an accounting gymnastics on display.
I think people don't realize like parties and the candidates can totally coordinate too.
Sure,
it's not like an independent expenditure. Like they can work hand in hand together.
Mm-hmm. And even the independent expenditures are not quite as much of a firewall as people often think. You can like get donations and say like, well, go over there.
Yeah,
that PAC exists. Right? Can't you?
Yes, you can.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, I think it's that same sort of line of like they're hitting Lori Saldana for something they can also be pretty well smacked for. All right. Did you guys have any favorites? Or?
Yeah. So I have a favorite that is on its face this same argument that we saw the last time that Nathan Fletcher ran for mayor, and it's hitting him over these, votes that he missed in the assembly. So we could debate the merits of that or whether that's like a fair critique. But this particular one, so a few years ago, it was like a photo of an empty chair.
Yeah.
And that was like the big thing, this Nathan Fletcher's empty chair. Now it's a horrible Photoshop of Nathan Fletcher's head on a jump roping body.
Really exaggerated
jump roping body. So like I think
and it's his body. It's literally his body. It's not a Photoshop.
I think that's probably what bothers him the most because it's not a
flannery. So
it's
I
a
feel
picture
like
of him at CrossFit jumping rope. It's an actual photo.
This is like under the radar. The Lincoln Club's secret thing is like really bad Photoshops, like purposely bad Photoshops, because there was like that horrific David Alvarez throwing gang signs Photoshop, and they just all seem to be like very large head on tiny body in a really embarrassing way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The voting thing gets to me. I will jump in on the fairness of that attack. It's just not an accurate description of how legislative bodies function.
Right. I mean, it's completely devoid of context in the fact that every lawmaker has a similar record.
You're right. It's like, and like it never comes down to one vote. That what you do, your productivity as a legislator is not measured in how many votes you file. It's what you do in committee level and what you do in writing legislation and building coalitions and passing bills, and none of that has to do with just like coming in.
It's not as if any of those bills failed or passed based on
his
him
attendance
being there,
or that even like the vote is that these are debating societies where everyone comes in with their with no determination on how they're going to vote, and it's just a matter of who puts forward the best set of ideas during that hearing, followed immediately by a vote. It's not how it
the
works.
ones that get me that are legit is when there's like a really sensitive topic and then you don't want to go
vote
on it and you're not willing to say why, right? So that would be a good one.
Absolutely. And if that was the case, skipped votes on difficult topics A, B, C, and D would be a completely fair hit.
Sure. Did you have one you liked?
That's all I wanted to say.
Okay. There was a bit of news that I think we could characterize as this conceptual scoop concept. There was last week, San Diego City Attorney Elliott announced she was seeking pre-election legal review of ballot initiatives competing to take over the Mission Valley Stadium site. Okay, so to be clear, that means she is suing and asking a court to throw both the Soccer City plan and SDSU West off the ballot.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in a funny way, she's actually technically suing the city clerk, like her own.
That's the
colleague.
named. Yeah.
To stop them from putting on the ballot. So you and I sort of grabbed onto that. Like it was being presented as though she was sort of like just petitioning a court for some like guidance.
Which was how they framed the press release.
Right.
And when we wrote this thing that just very succinctly said they're suing this to throw it off the ballot. And we got the first set of pushback was kind of surprising to me. People were like, well, how do you know she wants them thrown off the ballot? And I was like, well, I read the lawsuits would be mostly how I know, because let me tell you, these things are not ambiguous. If you were expecting to see these filings be like, on one hand, on the other hand, help us out, judge, it is not that. This is a very clear affirmative case that these things are illegal and have to go.
Yeah, there's one sentence there that says, the city submits that the initiative cannot lawfully be presented to voters because it suffers from fatal flaws. Really clear.
Yeah, it's not ambiguous.
No interpretation here.
So her argument is that ballot initiatives, and this is a big deal. This is why I think it's a big deal.
Yeah, actually, this is a good point. It's not just like a petty thing of being like, oh,
you could have been more clear.
Could have been more clear with the press release. She's making an interesting and potentially very important legal argument across the state.
Yeah, her argument is that ballot initiatives can change the law, but they can't dictate what elected officials do under the law. So both initiatives, for example, say exactly who the mayor and city council must sell the land to. The soccer guys say, well, you have to sell the land to a group affiliated with a Major League Soccer Association. It's like
much like the Chargers initiative said, you have to sell it to a team,
a pro sports team,
that an NFL team associated that plays in San Diego or something.
Right. So that is a fascinating argument, because we have like you said with the Chargers, we have gotten so far along this path that the only way to do some of these big projects is to do these initiatives that they're trying to literally lay out everything that must happen, not just change the law, like the zoning of an area or, policies regarding nightlife or sign height or whatever.
Pretty specific terms of contracts in the deal, right? The amount of money that'll be spent, the types of money that you'll be spent in the case of these developments, like the mitigation that you'll do around it in terms of access roads and that sort of thing. Like these are like really specific details,
right?
It's not a broad law the way you're supposed to. The argument she makes is compelling because it's pretty simple, and I think when the Chargers situation was going on, a question that I would receive a lot was, wait a second, so I could just start collecting signatures to get land sold to me, and then if I somehow managed to pass, that would happen? And what this says is, no, you can't do that. You can pass an initiative that changes a law, broadly speaking, but you cannot pass an initiative that tells a mayor about a very specific decision he must make underneath that law.
And in the city council, or in the SDSU West case, it says that the power to negotiate the sale, which would be to, in that case, SDSU, would end up at the city council's hand, which is odd because the city council doesn't have access to the real estate assets department, or who would they exactly negotiate with? The city council president? What? I mean, it's like anyway, it's a fascinating step, and she has asked for it to go before a court before the initiatives head to the ballot in November.
To me, it's just a good journalism lesson of maybe not letting public officials dictate the framing of what they're doing quite so strongly.
Yeah, I think that there was probably some pressure too from the mayor's office and city council to say like, hey, let's not make a huge deal that we're like throwing these off. It's not our role. Like we're just checking it out. I think that she could have spun it as like, we're trying to clarify once and for all across the state what these initiatives can and can't do.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I have no specific legal knowledge of whether they make an argument that will prevail or not. I did talk to one lawyer who thinks that they're right. But regardless, like having a conversation about what we can do with these initiatives is a productive one, and not like openly having that discussion was a missed opportunity. Now, granted, it's happened a week later,
I think
2 weeks later.
I think both sides might be a little frustrated that they spent millions of dollars so far after having presented their initiatives for quite some time.
So there is that too, and I think that as far as like, especially because there were 2 public memos released on the legal concerns associated with these that didn't mention this stuff. And there was another legal memo that was quite high profile that was confidential. That one also didn't mention these things. So there does seem to be a bit of like a where did this come from question that I think is fair to ask. But all that said,
maybe she just figured it
out. Yeah, exactly. All that said, I'm very happy to see what happens here, because I think the question of like what is the proper role of an initiative is one that obviously in this state we're asking ourselves a lot.
Yeah,
I think one other point on this, make there be no mistaking that were this to happen, were these 2 initiatives to get thrown off the ballot, there is one winner in that, and that's San Diego State University, which I think would be totally fine with this nightmare thing for them getting wiped off their plate. They might love it if Friends of SDSU won their initiative, but I think it's pretty clear they wanted to just crush Soccer City, and this would achieve that. And I think it increases the odds of that stadium sitting there the way it is for quite some time, but that was already kind of likely.
Yeah, it seemed pretty clear that they viewed Soccer City as a threat to them getting land that they had their eyes on for a very long time. And if you can eliminate that threat, great. If you can get the land, that's great too. But short of that, just eliminating the threat is a beneficial development for them.
All right, one last point before we get to the break. There was a poll released today from the Competitive Edge Research and our friend John Neested, and he found that Gavin Newsom and John Cox are kind of running away with it as far as the runoff trial goes.
Yeah, he said it was largely impossible for somebody to come back.
So we'll see.
Highly unlikely.
That's quite a proclamation, but you had an insight after that.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin Faulconer would have been a very appealing candidate, I think, to a lot of people who maybe don't want to vote for John Cox.
Yeah, so maybe he could have had a lane in this race after all. Do you think he's mad about it? Like, man, I could have run.
I know.
Could have done pretty well, especially against a Newsom. It would just be like such a clear contrast.
Because like even if you don't win, it's like to be the
guy
on a November election for the state is like a big deal.
Also, there's
John Cox is going to be it instead.
There's a non-zero chance that Newsom blows up. So that's how Faulconer wins all his races.
That's his thing.
Yeah.
All right, so stay tuned. We have our guests coming up. We also have our hero and goat in the second part of the show, and they're a good one. All right, this first part of the show is produced in partnership with News Radio 600 Kogo, our longtime friends there.
This Voice of San Diego podcast is sponsored in part by Competitive Edge Research. As a nonprofit news organization, Voice of San Diego depends on our members, foundations, and sponsors like Competitive Edge Research. We are very grateful for all of our supporters, and we will recognize their support during the show. Competitive Edge Research, San Diego's premier public opinion research firm, sponsors this podcast because they like good journalism as much as they like good polling. Since 1987, Competitive Edge has helped clients see the why buried deep within the numbers. Competitive Edge designs comprehensive research studies, collects bulletproof data, and employs robust analytics so you'll understand why things are the way they are. Competitive Edge. Know what to do. And if you like Voice of San Diego's work and want to become a sponsor, contact us at development@voiceofsandiego.org.
We are back. Our hero of the week.
So we have typically not paid all that much attention to the county grand jury.
This is the civilian grand jury. This isn't like a criminal inquisitive.
Which we also don't pay much attention to those. But that's
do we even have one locally?
I don't know
how that works.
So the civilian county grand jury, we haven't really paid that much attention to it, mostly because they just don't really seem to take on issues that were particularly relevant or controversial. But that has just not been the case lately. Yeah. They are doing things that are both relevant and controversial. In the last few weeks, they've issued reports on how to improve the local citizen initiative process, the community review board on police practices, and how to increase representation on community planning groups. Plus, they put out a relatively scathing report on the county's response to the Hep A crisis, and one on missed revenue opportunities for former Charger Stadium.
And last year, they did the thing on the San Diego Unified School District election process,
which seems to have actually initiated the issue and pushed it forward.
Absolutely. They had one on Marnie Foster quite a while back.
Right. Yeah, that also set the stage for that. Look, it's a group of volunteers. You can apply every year. And it seems like it must have got a shot in the arm or something. And it's been doing a lot of really interesting work. Well, what's really interesting about what they do is the reports they do require a response from the agency involved. If we do an investigative report about something, they could choose to ignore it. Now
they often do.
We're
certainly
so powerful, and our reports are so important and well read that they don't want to do that often.
No one wants to do that.
But in this case, they actually have to. And so it used to be in the past they'd have some not good report to respond to, and they just kind of say something. But now they've forced some really interesting debate.
Yeah, it's good. Good job. Keep it up. Thank you.
All right, our GOAT of the week.
You lose. Good day, sir.
I got the scoop. So behind the convention center, there's this little plot of land called the Fifth Avenue Landing. And that plot of land is very important if they want to expand the convention center the way they've drawn it up over the last few years, right? A long time, the last decade.
Yeah. It's been a while.
As long as any person in local public affairs has been in them, this has been the idea.
So the land is state land. It is owned by the state. The port manages all of the state title lands around the San Diego Bay, the Port of San Diego. And the port had a lease a long time with these partners, these guys, one guy in particular, Ray Carpenter, where he used to do dredging operations and really heavy industrial stuff there. He's the guy that would do pile drive stuff for big buildings. Okay.
Pile driver on the Undertaker.
Yeah. A lot of noise and hard hats. Anyway, so when the convention center got really large and more touristy, they kind of said, maybe you could stop doing your big things there. And so he's like, well, all right, let's start building a hotel. And then they come up with this idea for a hotel, but then the economy falls apart, nothing happens. They sort of think about doing it again, but as this idea to expand the convention center once more comes up, the city and the convention center corporation go to them and say, can we have that lease? And so they agree to a deal to pay about $12.5 million plus interest over time.
In installments.
To take that lease from them. But then the plan to expand the convention center fell apart. They didn't...
The judge said that the funding mechanism was not legally sound.
Right. They were raising taxes without a vote of the people.
Right.
So there was so much in the way of expanding the convention center. The city and the convention center corporation said, nah.
Yeah.
And they stopped paying.
Yeah, they just stopped paying.
Yeah. So these guys took the lease back and started another hotel project, and it got pretty far along. And
there was always an idea that it wasn't an earnest attempt to build a hotel. It was just for leverage.
Right, but they put $3 million into it.
Yeah, and they were always like, look, I assure you this is real. We're really trying to build a hotel.
They got a real hotel partner, Robert Greene. They got the support of the Hotel Workers Union. And then they also put $500,000 in an account and said, if you try to pass a convention center expansion initiative, we will oppose it with this money.
Yeah.
And then, so they started deal making again, and we finally got the terms of the deal. So the city has now agreed. Remember, they could have had this for $12.5 million and interest.
Not a hypothetical. They had an agreement. They were making payments towards that.
Yeah. They could have had that all done. And now they've agreed to give them $5 million right now. And this is all up for approval June 12th $5 million right now, straight up.
Mm-hmm.
And then if this convention center expansion initiative, Yes for a Better San Diego, prevails, they have to pay them about $28 million after that.
So $32 to $33 million.
That's more than $12 million, right?
Yeah, greater than. So,
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, classic San Diego, but we
know how to strike a deal, baby.
deal making.
Deal making.
So there's one really interesting part of this, and that is that if this prevails at 66.7%, then deal, they get the money and moves on. If it fails,
every time I hear that number, I just am reminded how high it is.
It's so hard.
Lot.
It's so high. 66%.
But hey, like 74th times the charm,
Right,
maybe.
Right. Yeah. So if they prevail, they get the money, they move on. Everybody, can you imagine getting a check for $25 million?
No.
Or 28, whatever. That would be like really life changing.
A check for $25,000 would be remarkably life changing.
Really, any amount would change your life.
You gave me a $25 cashier's check. I would sprint out of here like a little boy going to the candy store.
So that's clear. If they lose, they keep the $5 million and they can build a hotel.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's weird is if they get more than 50.
How much did they get in payments that were being made towards that $12 million before we pulled out?
I don't have that handy, but it's a couple million. Yeah.
Okay, so there's also a couple million that they received for nothing.
Yeah.
That was just into the pocket, into the old pocketbook.
So, yeah, I forgot about that. So then,
a lot of millions being thrown around here. Nothing's happened. Nothing's happened.
For state land.
This is state land. There's just millions changing hands for nothing.
So then,
if still hasn't been a vote, millions of dollars flying back and forth, state land sitting there untouched. This is lunacy.
Well, there's
this
a parking
crazy
lot.
way to run a city.
But there are renderings.
Yeah, there are lots of renderings. Okay, so the real interesting thing that might happen is if it gets more than 50% of vote, but not 66.7, which is a lot.
Yeah.
If it gets more than, remember they set it up as a citizens initiative for precisely this potential outcome, which is that the Supreme Court has ruled that maybe citizens initiatives don't fall under the law.
Threshold.
Yeah, that don't fall under the law that requires a 2/3 vote. So a lot of people think that if it gets more than 50%, it could pass, but that would require some legal issues. And so nobody knows quite what's going to happen, or I don't know from the people that are talking to me quite what's going to happen if this gets 52% of the vote or whatever. And there's a legal fight, but these guys want to pursue their hotel still, and it's not certified as a win, or it is. The one thing to watch right now is Mara Elliott, city attorney. City attorney's an important figure.
Turns out.
Time and time again, we're reminded.
City attorney will decide this summer sometime whether 2/3 is the requirement or whether 50% is, and then that will get challenged some way or the other if this only gets 50% of the vote.
But so if she determines that it's 50%, then you could certify the election as a win. There'd be a legal case after that, presumably, but
right.
It would, in the meantime, would be
trigger all
certified
these
as
things,
a win. Yeah.
possibly.
Okay.
But if she says it's 2/3, which I hear is kind of her like instinct, then somebody else would have to intervene. And so it's a really gnarly situation where, again, millions of dollars are just flying.
So it is at least possible, and there's a range of possibilities, but one of those is that they could get the millions they already got during the first set of payments that expired without us taking control of it. They could get another $5 million from this deal.
Yeah.
The vote could fail, and then they could still go build the hotel that they wanted to build anyway.
They're in
with
a good
the
position.
$7 or $8 million in their pocket for nothing, for having done nothing.
They've got some leverage, yes. So we talked to
what are we doing? What are we doing?
We talked to the
nonprofit
Wrong
news agencies.
business.
This is so stupid.
I know this is we
idiots?
fight for 1.5 million a year, or whatever,
Jesus.
1.8, and it's like barely surviving.
God,
all we need is a lease on the port. All right. So we talked to Gil Cranberry, he's the chairman of the Convention Center Corporation. He said, in such a large project, even $30 million is a small portion for land acquisition costs, given how much money we make in hotel room taxes over time with the expansion, it is worth it.
Okay. What about when it was 12 million? Smaller.
Would have been
That's
more
a smaller
worth it.
number.
Smaller than 30. More better.
All right. So we have a couple of interviews. We got Krasner. What's his first
Larry.
name? Larry Krasner, the DA of Philadelphia, was in town.
And we also talked to Susan Muncie at GenerateHope. She's the founder and a clinical director there. It's an organization that helps rescue people from sex trafficking. You are mentioned often as a point of comparison for Genevieve Jones-Wright in this race. And as the race has ramped up here, there's been a specific line of accusation or attack against Genevieve that I'm interested if you heard the same thing. It's basically a line of questioning about where the money was coming from and why George Soros was so interested in the race, combined with an idea that the ideas that she's espousing are either anti-law enforcement or pro-crime. Did that same thing happen in your race?
Well, I wouldn't say exactly the same thing. You know, one of the great advantages that I had in my race in Philadelphia is really a parallel between Genevieve and me. And that parallel is that we're both extremely familiar with criminal justice, having been in courts for years, doing criminal justice. But we're not prosecutors. A lot of the problems we have were created by prosecutors. Mass incarceration was created by prosecutors. There's racist use of the law, making this the most incarcerated country in the U.S., spending all of our money on things other than public schools and the treatment of addiction, criminalizing addiction, spending money on things that don't produce jobs. The best antidote for crime, the best prevention for crime is a job. And yet this is what career prosecutors have given us. So, one of the great advantages we found in my race was that when the other candidates, all of them had been prosecutors, were attacking me, the answer was, you're the problem. And if you're going to have change, real change, you're going to need somebody who has the expertise in the field, but someone who also comes at it from a different angle. So, yes, that part is similar. As for the issue around the money, in our campaign, we raised, I would say, a better than average amount of money in less than half the time as compared to most of the other candidates. What you're speaking of with George Soros is not money that came into a campaign. None of that came into a campaign. That was an independent expenditure. And what happened there was some commercials and mailings showed up about 3 weeks before the election. 3 weeks before the election, in a 7-way race, we were either in first place or tied for first. And so that money certainly was helpful to amplify the message, but the message had already resonated, and it had resonated all over the city. What people don't talk about in that regard is the fact that in the general election, there was no outside support, and still we took 75% of the vote. In both the primary and the general, enormous numbers of voters who were totally unexpected turnout. I mean, we saw, turnout go from up to 150% of votes in the primary to 170% of votes in the general. And that was because, I would say in some ways like Bernie Sanders, or in some ways like some other candidates, we excited voters who felt disconnected from the system, felt they weren't heard. And those voters came out in ways they would not come out. So I totally expect that with Genevieve. I think that she's going to excite a lot of voters who feel like the criminal justice system has gone the wrong way for a long time, and they don't want to choose between a couple of people who've been part of the problem because they were prosecutors.
I'm interested in some of that rhetoric about prosecutors, career prosecutors, being part of the problem that created this system of mass incarceration. When you got onto the job after you won the race and you started, you went into the office for the first day, you started implementing some policies and procedures, did you get much in the way of pushback as an outsider coming in from those career prosecutors that were now working for you?
The answer is yes and no. When we first came in, because I had been in court 4 and 5 days a week for 30 years, I was very familiar with some of these prosecutors. And there were a small number who had to go. So we asked them to resign. It was only on the order of about 5% of the total staff, which is low. It's much less than other prosecutors who are more centrist and have come in. have done in terms of replacing personnel. But we did ask them to go because we knew, based on very long experience and based on the opinions of several people. So once we got that core group to move on, and we did it, frankly, as humanely as you can, we found that among the younger attorneys, there was a whole lot of excitement and interest because they have heard of mass incarceration. They understand the bankrupting of the public schools. They think from a prevention orientation. They believe in racial justice. And where there was resistance, it was among some, not all, of the more senior attorneys whose training had been done a certain way, whose attitude really was still that you should maximize the seriousness of the charges and the number of the charges. You should maximize the number of years of incarceration for a sentence. They still had that sports mentality that we're trying to maximize everything rather than a balanced, mentality that bent towards justice. So, there will be, I think, difficulties with change. There will be bumps. There will be hiccups. This is normal. This is what change looks like and has always looked like. But it seems to me as we go on day after day, even though we're rolling out some really pretty adventurous and, frankly, I think wonderful policies, we're seeing people coming along and feeling good about what we're doing.
So was there anything that when you started the job that you had a new insight into or a new appreciation for once you were on the other side of the courtroom, that maybe in your campaign you had envisioned yourself doing it one way, but by the time you were in the position, you realized maybe the prosecutorial mindset had considered something that you hadn't? Was there anything like that?
Well, I certainly was more familiar with the pressures that prosecutors often feel. I believe that prosecutors in general don't go into the job to be unfair or to wield power in excessive ways or to lock up the whole country. I think they go into the job because they want to make society safer. They often make a sacrifice in terms of the compensation that they might have had. I knew that before, but certainly I felt it more when I was in there and I was in the company of people who had been career prosecutors. Fortunately, because I really am not interested in running for anything else and I have no wish to be a politician, I was able to alleviate that pressure. Cases were no longer about whether or not the district attorney was going to become governor or going to become senator, and therefore they were no longer geared towards the press coverage that would be reviewed statewide. So that pressure I was able to alleviate. The other pressure, frankly, comes from a long tradition in the press, and I say this as the son of a writer, author, and guy who did a lot of journalism, but the sad reality of media coverage of criminal justice is it's been a comic book for the longest time that was based on fear and blood and guts to sell papers. It's a well-documented history of yellow journalism going all the way back to William Randolph Hearst, that homicides go up X amount and coverage of homicides goes up 7X amount. Why? Because it sells papers. And so if you're going to be talking about a matter of the management of risk of crime, and you're going to be talking about what this all really is, which is analogous to medicine, you need to be scientific in the same way that we are scientific when we talk about medicine. No one expects doctors to end mortality. No one expects every single case when you have a medical condition to turn out perfectly. We all accept that because we're realistic about that. Well, the same has to be true with criminal justice. If you are doing a very good job overall, if people are safer, and if the tactics you are using in the long run are going to make the quality of life better for everyone, that's success. Mm-hmm. It is not failure just because there is another homicide after you are in office. It's not failure because there are individual terrible outcomes. There will always be some individual terrible outcomes. The point is, in a scientific way, to measure what you're doing, measure your success, and continue to try to push in the direction that science points.
Do you get the sense that there's any sort of change happening within media coverage of crime and criminal justice? Things like stop and frisk, Black Lives Matter, the sort of understanding around police-involved shootings and the sorts of databases that places like the Washington Post have decided to keep, introduction of places like the Marshall Project. It seems to me that criminal justice, that awareness around criminal justice and criminal justice reform has been pretty prevalent in the media in the last few years. Is that something that you think is reflected either in local media or just in media generally?
Well, the media has covered Ferguson, and they did cover the origins of Black Lives Matter movement. Certainly with the advent of everybody being able to video police misconduct and all of the unjustified shootings that have been recorded on video, there has been a realization on the part of people who didn't want to believe it was true, that this is not only true, but has been true for a very long time. So that has been covered. What has not changed, though, is the simplistic coverage that you see, the sensational, fear-based coverage that you see when there is a sensational crime. I think there is, though, a fascinating generational dynamic here. It seems to me, for whatever reason, that younger people are a lot more cognizant of the reality of a racist system and the reality of a system that has hijacked so much of our national resources and put them into corrections, which does not reduce crime, rather than putting it into things that really do reduce crime. These policies that we have had from prosecutors for at least the 30 years I have been in criminal court day in and day out, these policies actually cause crime. People don't talk about that. They talk about whether they prevent crime or not, but they cause crime. When you take an 18-year-old who's done something not so bad, you make that 18-year-old a felon, and he therefore sees his lifetime income cut to a third of what it might have been, and cannot assume the same role as a breadwinner, as a provider, the same level of respect within a family. There are so many consequences of this and it is such an impediment to the economy and to jobs and to everything else that it breaks individuals, which breaks communities, which breaks up the economy. It causes crime. When you see this vast and drastic over supervision of people, this, years and years and years of probation and parole, despite the fact that every scientific study says if you're doing more than 3 years, you're doing too much, and you're simply creating tripwires. So if somebody smokes weed in 5 years, they'll end up back in jail losing their job. Or if somebody in 5 years, and they are mostly poor, can't pay a fine, they're going to end up back in jail. When you see all of these things, you start to understand that even though prosecutors didn't intend it, they have created a nightmare in terms of the ability of this country to prevent crime. And they have, frankly, done it mostly for reasons of self-advancement, because chief prosecutors like to be U.S. senators, like to be United States presidents.
Last question I got for you. So the memo you put out that outlined, this was a few months ago, that outlined some changes in sentencing guidelines and charging guidelines. I wrote a story recently about how many of those things, certainly not all of them, but a lot of those things had been accomplished in California through ballot measures and other state legislation. I'm curious, when you change a policy that way, you run the risk that when your term is up, that the next person would come in and either reverse it or change it in some other way. Is there anything you're looking to do there that would be that would have the force of law, either a city council push or a county-wide change, or something at the state level that might codify some of these reforms to exist beyond you?
Well, realistically, we cannot make the state legislature in a state that went for Donald Trump do these sensible things yet. I think that we will be there in several years. And Pennsylvania is interesting because it's very analogous to California in many ways. You have a few liberal strongholds in a state that has some very conservative legislators, and California in many ways has done the same things as Pennsylvania, just earlier. A lot of your, three strikes type legislation leading to insanely overcrowded jails, leading to the realignment in order to reverse that kind of draconian legislation, came before Pennsylvania followed suit and would come in with similar type of legislation. I have to think that Pennsylvania will wake up, and that within the next several years, a lot of the things that we are doing in an individual discretionary way will become matters of state law. But we're not there yet. And the beauty of being a district attorney, the chief prosecutor anyway, is that there's a tremendous amount of discretion and the ability to decide when to stay your hand and when to not wield excessive power when the law is doing some dumb stuff. So at least until the legislature gets there and these young voters come into their own and they dominate the political spectrum with more progressive ideas, at least until then, prosecutors in particular cities can, on an individual basis, make some great change, and then the legislatures can come around much in the same way they did in California.
All right, that's all I got for you, Mr. Krasner. I really appreciate the time.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. And we're back in the Voice of San Diego podcast studio. And now we're joined by Susan Muncie. She's the founder and clinical director of GenerateHope. It's an organization that provides services and sort of help and availability and whatnot for women who are recovering from sex trafficking.
Right.
Survivors, as you call them.
Thank you.
And so we've sort of fallen into a running dialogue on this show in the last few months about the distinctions between sex trafficking and sex work, whether there is a meaningful distinction there, which certainly some people don't seem to think that there is. Can you tell us a little bit about what caused you to reach out to us? You wrote us an op-ed for us this week responding to a previous one that we ran the week before. So maybe talk to us a little bit about that. And also maybe you could weave into that how you got into this field.
Okay. I just kind of wanted to weigh in. I saw that, there was kind of one end of the debate and wanted to be sure that the other side of the debate was being heard, and that's, more on the sex trafficking end of things. And how I got into this work, I'm a psychotherapist, and about 10 years ago, I realized what a big issue this was in San Diego. And so kind of long story short, weaned down my private practice and got started with GenerateHope, so that we could be helping the women that want to exit the sex trade. And
so your op-ed specifically described a lot of what you see at GenerateHope, the women who come there and who you bring in. You said that there are so many that you often have to turn people away. Mm-hmm. What is it that tends to bring people to GenerateHope? What is the inciting factor that makes them finally come to you and say that they want a way out?
Well, of course, the first thing is that they have a desire to be out of the sex trade. Mm-hmm. Sometimes what really is the final factor is getting arrested and having law enforcement, alert them to the options that are available for them. They may have gone in to see a doctor or be working with a social worker who, in the same way, alerts them to services that are available for them. It could be a number of different things. There could have been what you might call a bad trick. It could be that they have a child now and they want to, take care of that child and not expose him or her to the life.
So you hinted at something in your op-ed that has kind of gnawed at me during this debate. I want to read a line from your piece. Perhaps it's the population I work with, but I have not met anyone who is in the sex trade because they just decided one day that it might be a good idea to sell their body and give their money to another person. So we've kind of heard a version of this same argument from Summer Stephan and other advocates who work with sex trafficking victims. Essentially, I have boots on the ground and everyone I encounter has been coerced in some way.
Right.
Do you think it's just by virtue of the work that you do that perhaps there is a population of people who are sex workers voluntarily, and it's just that you don't encounter them because you're in a space to work with victims?
I think that could be the case. But like I said, the people that we encounter never wanted to be there. They were coerced in, and usually when they were young teens. And they were forced to stay there. And as young teens, they really didn't have the wherewithal psychologically to figure a way to get out.
So when Summer Stephan was here, and which sort of kick-started this discussion that we've been having for a while, what she said was that there might be a small percent of people who are able to exercise full agency and, knowing the situation, go into sex work voluntarily because it's the best opportunity for them or something along those lines. She suggested that was a very small percentage of people, and the vast majority are coerced at some point. And many of those who would today say that they are working voluntarily don't realize that they were coerced earlier in life, or, or that they had been trafficked at some point. And there's an extent to which I wonder if that creates an incontrovertible argument, basically. Mm-hmm. If the idea is that this work, such as it is not something that one could enter into unless they were left without any other options, and therefore it's not voluntary. Does that mean that even if I look at somebody and talk to them and they say I'm doing this voluntarily, that I can't take their word for it, essentially?
I think it's important to take, people's word, for where they're at. But I do think that, there's something that happens that causes one to think, I'd like to go into sex work, or this is the option that I have. And what we see, and when I say we, not just GenerateHope, but I'm on the Human Trafficking CSEC Council, which is under the Board of Supervisors. Mm-hmm. And so we work with prosecutors, with law enforcement, with victim services, with research. There are 8 different subcommittees. And in that group, what we see is women who want to get out, women who were coerced, women who did have child sexual abuse in their history. Things that would lead one down that path, as I said, mm-hmm. In my letter.
Yeah.
So you've been doing this work for quite a while now. Mm-hmm. Has it impacted the work that you do or the discussions that you're having among other advocates, that this has kind of spilled into a political race and become a really public debate?
Has it affected the work that I do?
Or have you noticed people talking about it in interesting ways, or has there been any impact from the fact that, this is kind of spilled out into a political race?
I think people are absolutely talking about it. I think it's striking a nerve for people on both sides of the debate. Before I came in, a couple of days ago, I talked with the women that are in our program and shared Thucy's article, and there was quite a bit of reaction to that, and one of the women was near tears, and she said, this is my story. I've been there, and this negates my story by just saying it's it's sex work. So
that's really interesting, because when we published an op-ed a couple weeks ago from Jamie Quint,
mm-hmm.
Saying something very similar to what you said this week, that there's a vanishingly small percentage of people who are doing this voluntarily. Sex trafficking is a major crisis and it deserves our attention.
Mm-hmm.
You said that people said this is my story and it's minimizing my experience, that what they read in India's op-ed. It was interesting. We were bombarded by sex workers mm-hmm. online who read Jamie's op-ed mm-hmm. and said the same thing in reverse. Yeah. They said, I am a voluntary sex worker. I am an empowered person who is exercising mm-hmm. my own agency. They were quite mad at us for publishing the op-ed.
Oh.
How dare you suggest that I don't have the ability to
mm-hmm.
to enter into this with a full understanding of what's happening. So it's interesting that you got a very similar reaction
right.
on the other side. Do you run into do you have experience? Do you run into just truly voluntary sex workers who find problems in this push to raise awareness around human trafficking because they think it's creating sort of a hysteria?
I don't.
You don't?
Yeah. And again, I think that's the nature of my work, because we don't do rescues. So I guess if we had a rescue operation, then we might run into people that would say that they're...
What would a rescue operation entail?
That would be somebody that goes out in the community or online
mm-hmm.
and works to find women that are being sex trafficked and offer them services. Yeah, so we get referrals from a variety of sources. So the women that come to us have already made a decision that they don't want to be there.
Interesting. So one thing I asked India last week that I'm interested to hear from you is whether San Diego by virtue of being on the border, by virtue of any of its other characteristics, seems materially different from Indianapolis or Phoenix or Columbus, Ohio, or any other city. The nature of sex trafficking and sex work and this world, is it different here?
That's an excellent question, and a lot of people think that it really is very different because we're so close to Mexico, and that that would mean that there would be Mexican women being brought across to be trafficked. That does happen, but it's about 15%, depending on the survey. But the majority are American citizens, and American kids, women, boys, who've been lured in to the sex trade.
Is there anything, given that this has become, a sticking point in the DA's race, are there any reforms that either somebody locally like the DA or at the state level that you think would really impact your work that you'd like to see happen?
What I'm really pleased to be seeing is that there's a great focus on demand. And so that there's not so much of a focus on arresting women who may be legitimate sex workers, but it's about looking at the Johns. And, with the idea that without demand, there wouldn't, be an issue, or with lowered demand, there would be less of an issue. So prosecutors and law enforcement are really looking more for individuals who are being trafficked so that the assistance can be offered.
Well, it's interesting, actually, because although this has turned into a serious issue in this district attorney's race, both Summer Stephan and Genevieve Jones-Wright are actually kind of on the same page in terms of who should be the target of prosecutorial resources. There's neither of them are out there making the charge that we should be sweeping up women off of El Cajon Boulevard and making that the subject of our charges. But I'm interested, when you hear Genevieve Jones-Wright say Summer Stephan is misguided just because she can't wrap her head around the idea that a woman would make this decision on her own doesn't mean that no one is out there doing that. As somebody who's working in that field, does that bother you? Do you dislike hearing somebody out there making that argument?
I dislike negativity in politics at whatever the issue is. But that's naive, in a sense, to think that there's not going to be that negativity in the attacks. I'd much rather see a race in regard to what their strengths are and what they have to offer, the people of San Diego.
Do you think there's any sort of concern that there would be a change in direction from what's sort of there's the human trafficking effort has gathered a lot of steam in the last 5 to 6 years, I would say, and it's got much more attention. It's got
more resources.
State and federal laws, grants have made themselves available. If a prosecutor like Genevieve Jones-Wright, who has the disposition towards it that she does, came in, does it concern you that there would be a lessened focus on the work that you do?
Well, it does concern me. And just to be clear, there are still very few resources. We only have about 35 beds in San Diego for trafficking victims. And
countywide, there's 35 beds.
Countywide. And it's an $810 million issue, as research has shown. This is...
What do you think the size of the trafficked population in San Diego is right now, give or take?
Well, I can look back at research and say it's, between 8,000 and 11,000.
So there's 8,000 to 11,000 women involuntarily in the sex trade, and there's 35 beds in the county to offer them a way out.
Pretty amazing, isn't it? And the only reason why there aren't more beds is because the finances are not there. So, you mentioned grants. There are not a lot of grants. There are a couple of federal grants that come out each year, and they are highly competitive, as one could imagine. I don't know of any grants in San Diego, and there's very little for California. So funding is always an issue.
You mentioned that the percentage of people who are trafficked in San Diego is maybe only about 15% from Mexico or involving people from Mexico. Do you think there are any other kind of misconceptions out there about the population of people who are trafficked? Because I think that's something people think of as San Diego, oh, it's because of Mexico and it's a huge part of the problem. Are there any other, maybe myths out there about who's being trafficked?
I think another myth is that that this is, and this is kind of the reverse again about, sex work, is that these women want to be there, that they like the money, which they're actually, if they're trafficked, they're not even getting the money, that this is something that they want to do. And in working with trafficking survivors, like I said, it's not something they ever wanted to do. They don't get the money. They're unhappy to be there. And they're being brutally abused, physically, sexually, emotionally. Mm-hmm. So it's not something that women like or want as far as being trafficked. And I will make the distinction between sex workers and sex trafficking. And I think that's probably what we need to do, rather than say it has to be all one way or the other, is recognize that there are different camps. Mm-hmm.
What was your thought on the legislation to ban Backpage and websites like that?
Yeah, I know that for some people that makes life difficult, but because it's a major avenue for trafficking, I'm very pleased to see that Backpage was shut down. Mm-hmm. I know that.
The scenario I have heard spelled out is that it offers an opportunity to be a sex worker without a pimp more easily and more safely, because, and I'm not suggesting that this is across the board, but the hypothetical scenario I've heard spelled out often is that if you are a voluntary sex worker and you don't want to have a pimp, that these sorts of websites create an opportunity to create a network where you can keep track of dangerous Johns, people that you don't want to meet up with. You can do some sort of screening ahead of time, and it's less dangerous than being out on the street. So that's the counter argument I often hear. It seems like that's what you're alluding to, but you think on net it's better to eliminate it than to perpetuate it.
Exactly, especially when we know that child sex trafficking is happening, and I think we really need to protect our children in any way that we can. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think probably something else that's can be confusing is that it's an easy thing to be out there, a woman without a pimp. To my knowledge, it's hard to do that without a pimp coming and trying to hone in on your territory, as it were.
Right.
Yeah, because they're all about the money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you ever have any, your group, your organization, do you ever have any run-ins with pimps who come and recognize where the women who are staying with you have come from?
We don't, and it's very interesting. The pimps tend to not want to put themselves in harm's way, and so they're not really likely to come up to a recovery home or any place where there are going to be responsible adults who are going to pick up the phone and call 911 or do whatever they have to do, to protect the women. They really work more out of the shadows and, are able to control the women and have them doing their dirty work, as it were, even their recruiting, so that they're not in harm's way.
Susan Muncie from GenerateHope, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you.